My sister smiled at her rehearsal dinner and said, "Tell everyone your firefighter nickname." She thought one word would humiliate me in front of her new family. But the moment I said anchor, the groom's 80-year-old grandfather went pale, set down his glass, and ordered her to apologize, before anyone in the room even understood why. She was already smiling before I said anything. That's the part I keep coming back to. Delaney had her wine glass half raised, and she'd already turned that smile toward me, the one she'd been building since we were kids, the one that always arrived a second before the punchline because she always knew where she was going before anyone else did. "Tell everyone your firefighter nickname," she said. 30-some people turned to look at me at once. Cole's mother, his cousins from Bozeman, 2 men from the company where he worked, Margot, the maid of honor, already pressing her lips together like she was trying not to laugh too early, the banquet manager near the door who had gone still, and off to my right, though I swear I didn't really see him until it mattered, one old man with white hair and a back too straight for his age who had stopped with his fork halfway to his plate. I looked at my sister. She was glowing. White rehearsal dress, hair loose, the whole room arranged around her exactly the way she liked it. She'd spent 8 months planning this weekend down to the fold of the napkins. This was just one more thing she had planned. "Come on," she said, louder now, smiling wider. "Don't make it weird." And I thought, there it is. That was always her move. Back someone into a corner, then blame them for standing in it. I folded my hands on the table. I said one word, anchor. "You have to understand something about Delaney and me, or none of the rest of this lands. We grew up in Cedar Bluff, in a house too small for the number of arguments our family produced. Our mother, Carol, had exactly one rule, and it sat above everything else. Above honesty, above fairness, above her own peace of mind. The rule was, don't make a scene. Keep it smooth. Whatever it costs, keep it smooth. My father wasn't around long enough to have a rule. He left when I was 8, and Delaney was 11, and after that, holding the picture of a happy family together became my mother's full-time job, the kind of job that has no hours and no pay and never, ever ends. Delaney learned how to work that rule before she could ride a bike. She figured out early that if she smiled at the right second and pointed the blame somewhere else fast enough, she could walk away from almost anything. She was funny and quick and pretty, and people wanted to believe her. Teachers, boyfriends, the relatives who only saw us at the holidays. She would say something cruel, wrap it in a joke, and if you flinched, she would tell the room you couldn't take a joke. Then the room would agree with her. That was the part that took me years to understand. The room almost always agreed with her. I was the other kind of kid, the one who wouldn't let it go, the one who made things complicated by refusing to pretend nothing had happened. There was a night when I was 13, a school awards thing, where I'd won a small science prize, the only thing I'd ever won, and Delaney stood up at the dinner after and did 3 full minutes about how I'd probably cheated because I was too boring to have friends, but not boring enough to be smart. The table laughed. My aunt laughed. My mother laughed too, and then squeezed my hand under the table and whispered, "She doesn't mean it. Just let it go." I remember looking at the little plastic trophy and understanding, in the specific way a 13-year-old understands things, that in this family my winning was less important than Delaney getting her laugh. By the time I was 16, the whole thing had a name. Quinn being difficult, Quinn being sensitive, Quinn can't take a joke. I had a partial scholarship to study geology 2 states away, and I took it, and I did not look back, because I had finally found out there were places in the world where being the person who notices what's actually happening is considered an asset instead of a personality flaw. Distance did what distance does. For a few years I just wasn't there, and not being there felt like air. But here is the thing about a family that runs on smoothing it over. The moment you stop showing up to absorb the blows, somebody has to be the new bad guy, and that somebody is always you. In Delaney's telling, I hadn't left for a life. I had abandoned the family. I was the cold one, the one who thought I was better than everybody. My mother would call and relay these verdicts in a hurt little voice like she was just passing along the weather. Delaney says you never even ask about her. Delaney cried about you at Thanksgiving, and I would feel the old guilt land exactly where it was aimed. That is the genius of a person like my sister. She can hurt you in a room full of people, and then, by the time the story gets retold, she's the one who got hurt, and you're the one who needs to apologize. So when she called and asked me to stand up in her wedding, I knew what it was. It was a performance of forgiveness she could show off to Cole's family. Proof that she was the bigger person. That whatever was wrong between us was clearly my doing, and she had graciously risen above it. I knew all of that, and I said yes anyway, because some stupid hopeful part of me, the same part that kept the plastic trophy in a drawer for 15 years, still thought maybe this time would be the time it was different. It is embarrassing how long hope outlives evidence. I didn't go into wildland fire to get away from my family, but I won't pretend that wasn't part of why it fit. I wanted to belong to something that didn't run on performance. Something where you couldn't smile your way out of a bad call, where the ground didn't care how charming you were. Fire doesn't negotiate. Fire doesn't take your side because you're pretty. I spent 6 seasons on a hotshot crew out of the high country, cutting line through country most people will never see, in heat most people will never feel. 20-person crews, 16-hour shifts, 2 weeks on the line at a stretch eating out of foil pouches and sleeping in the dirt with the glow of the fire on the underside of the smoke. It is the hardest thing I have ever done, and the only place I have ever been completely, exactly myself. That was where I got the name. There was a superintendent named Boone who ran our crew. 20 years on the line, hands like tree bark, a man who used about 9 words a day and made all of them count. He started calling me Anchor about halfway through my second season. I asked him once why. He was sitting on a log sharpening a tool and didn't look up. Anchor point, he said. It's where you start the line. The one piece of ground the fire isn't allowed to get behind. You build everything off it. He ran the file down the blade. Slow. Everybody else on the line gets to fall back if it goes bad. The anchor doesn't. The anchor holds, or the crew working off it doesn't go home. He looked at me then, just once. First fire I watched you work. The wind turned and every other set of feet on that hill started moving the wrong way. Yours didn't. You read it before it finished happening and you didn't flinch. He went back to the blade. You're the thing the rest of us tie into. That's the name. The name stuck. It was never a joke to the people I worked with. It was the opposite of a joke. It was a thing they had watched me earn, one bad day at a time. And on a crew like that, the name people give you is the only thing you actually own. You spend more hours with those 19 other people than with anyone you will ever love. You trust them with the literal fact of your continued breathing. When one of them calls you by the name they gave you, it is the closest thing to family I have ever felt. Closer than the one I was born into. And I am aware of how that sounds. 6 seasons, hundreds of fires, most of them blur together into one long memory of smoke and aching shoulders and the particular orange of a sun seen through a column. But there was one fire I came off of changed in a way I never fully came back from, one I still don't talk about even with people who were there, and for 3 years I had kept it folded up small and put away where it couldn't reach me. I had no way of knowing I was about to have to take it back out, in of all the places on earth, a wedding banquet hall, in front of my sister. Here is what stillness is, since it matters to the rest of this. There are moments on a fire when everything goes wrong at the same instant. The wind swings, the column that was rising straight up suddenly lays flat and starts pushing flame downhill at you. A safe afternoon becomes a thing that can kill all 20 of you in under 2 minutes, and your whole body, every nerve you have, starts screaming, run. And the truth, the brutal counterintuitive truth that the job beats into you, is that running is what kills people. Panic is what kills people. The crews that die are almost never the ones who stayed calm and thought. So you learn to go still. You learn to let the screaming happen in your body while your head keeps coolly working the only question that matters, which is, where is the safe ground and how do I get my people to it? You learn to be the steadiest thing on the mountain at the exact moment the mountain is trying to kill you. That is what Boone saw in me before I'd ever seen it in myself. And that, though I had no idea yet, was the thing that was about to play out in a banquet room at my sister's rehearsal dinner. Delaney had heard the word anchor exactly once. 2 Christmases ago I made the mistake of mentioning it at dinner, and she laughed and said it sounded like a wrestler nobody remembered. Said I was always so intense about the fire stuff that I treated it like I'd been to war. She didn't know what it meant. She didn't want to. It wasn't a story she could be the center of, so it wasn't a story worth knowing. And now she had decided to take that one word, the only thing I'd ever earned that she couldn't take credit for, and turn it into a bit at her own rehearsal dinner, in front of her fiancé's whole family, in a room full of people who would laugh because the bride wants them to laugh, and a bride owns the room. I knew exactly what she was doing, because I had spent 30 years studying her. What I did not know, what nobody at that table knew, was that the white-haired man across the room had spent 40 years of his life in fire himself, and that the word anchor meant something very specific and very sacred to a man like him. The laughter started the second the word left my mouth. Delaney went first, that bright performing laugh she saved for an audience, and the table rolled with her. Cole's cousins, a couple of his co-workers, even Margot, who at least had the decency to glance at me first. Anchor, Delaney repeated, savoring it, turning it over for the room, like the thing that drags the boat to the bottom. More laughter. Someone at the far end said it back to themselves and snorted, "Did you sink the whole crew, or just slow them down?" she said, and she was riding it now, 30 people's attention lifting her higher, the way it always did. I keep picturing them all standing around a campfire going, "What do we call the slow one?" She pressed a hand to her chest, mock tender. Anchor, because they couldn't move. The table loved that one. What were the runner-up names? She went on. Captain Deadweight? Sergeant Holds Us Back? She was performing now in the full sense, working the table like a comic who can feel the room with her, glancing around to collect each laugh before reaching for the next one. I'm just saying, of all the things to be known for, some people get Maverick, some people get Hawk. She gestured at me with her glass. And some people get named after the heaviest, most boring object on the entire boat. A man down the table actually clapped. I sat still, hands folded, shoulders level, face flat. I let her have it. I want to be honest about that, because part of me, the 13-year-old with the plastic trophy, was already doing the old math, already calculating how to make myself small enough that this would pass, and we could all go back to pretending. My mother's hand found my knee under the table. She leaned in close. "Just let it go," she whispered. The same 5 words, 30 years of the same 5 words. I turned and looked at her, slow. "Why?" I said quietly. "Why is that always my job and never hers?" She didn't answer. She never answered that one, because answering it honestly would have meant admitting that letting it go had been her entire strategy for 30 years, and that the bill for it had come due in ways neither of us had ever been brave enough to add up. Delaney was still going. She'd turned to Cole now, using him as a prop, leaning into his shoulder with mock disbelief. "Can you imagine? They actually called my own sibling that," she said, shaking her head, getting comfortable. "I swear the fire people are so draw," and that was when I heard it. A glass set down on the table. Soft, deliberate, the exact opposite of an accident. I looked across across the room. The old man with the white hair had put down his water glass and laid both hands flat on the cloth, and he was looking at my sister with an expression I can only describe as recognition, not of her, of something she had just said, something she had accidentally told the entire room about herself. I'd been introduced to maybe 50 of Cole's relatives in the last 24 hours, and the names had all run together, so I didn't know who he was yet. But I saw his posture, straight as a plumb line, even at his age, and I saw his face go very, very still, not confused, not offended, recognized. He pushed his chair back. The scrape of the legs across the hardwood cut through the laughter like a saw through wet pine, and every head at that table turned. He stood up, slowly. He wasn't a tall man anymore. Age takes that from everyone, but when he came up out of that chair, the whole room rearranged itself around him, and it had nothing to do with his height and everything to do with something that people who have spent their lives responsible for other people's lives carry in the way they hold themselves. He looked straight at my sister. "Apologize," he said. The word dropped into total silence. Delaney blinked, glass still half up, smile still stuck on her face but frozen now, going wrong at the edges. "What?" she said. "Apologize," he said again. His voice didn't rise. That was the worst part of it. It didn't crack and it didn't climb. There was nothing performed in it. No theater, no heat, no anger you could push back against. And that, I think, was exactly what made it unbearable to sit inside of. You can wait out anger. Anger burns itself down to ash and then it's gone. You cannot wait out a man that calm, because calm like that isn't a mood, it's a verdict. Delaney forced a laugh, the brittle version, the one that's mostly air. "Grandpa Roy," she said. "Come on, it was a joke." Grandpa Roy? Cole's grandfather. I filed it away even then, even in the middle of it, because that's what I do. "No," he said. "It wasn't a joke, and I don't think you know what you just stepped on. So let me tell you, and then you can decide whether you still feel like laughing." He looked around the table at all of them, taking his time. "I spent 41 years in the fire service. Started on an engine company at 19, retired a battalion chief. I have buried good people. I have folded flags and handed them to mothers. And in all those years, there were maybe a handful of names I heard given out that meant what your sibling's name means. We don't hand a name like Anchor to people who want one. We hand it to the ones who become one, usually on the worst day of somebody else's life." His eyes had not left her. "You took the best thing a person can be in this line of work, and you used it to get a cheap laugh at a dinner, so apologize." Delaney looked around the table, and I recognized the look instantly because I had watched her do it our entire lives. The find an ally scan. The fast, desperate search for one face, just one, that will laugh with her and break the tension and make it all okay again. One ally was always all she had ever needed. She scanned 30 faces. Nobody gave it to her. Not Cole, who was staring at his grandfather with something climbing up the back of his eyes. Not his parents, who had gone stiff in their chairs. Not the cousins who'd been snickering 10 seconds before. Not Margot, who had become deeply and suddenly fascinated by her own plate. For the first time in maybe her entire life, Delaney was alone in the middle of a joke she had made, and the room was not going to come rescue her. "I didn't mean anything by it," she said, and her voice had dropped into a register I had not heard from her since we were children, since before she learned that being loud could pass for being right. Roy's jaw tightened. "That," he said, "is what people say when they want the damage and none of the bill." Cole still hadn't said a word. He leaned toward Margot, 2 seats down from him, and when he finally spoke, it was very quiet, almost gentle, which was somehow worse than if he'd shouted. "Margot," she looked up like she'd been caught at something. "Did Delaney plan this? Before tonight?" The word planned sat in the air over the whole table. Margot's mouth opened and nothing came out. "Margot," he said again, careful even. "Please, I need to hear it from you." Margot looked at my sister. Delaney's eyes found hers across the table, and I watched an entire conversation happen between them in about 2 seconds without a single word in it. Don't you dare. I am asking you as your best friend, as the woman whose bridesmaid dress you already paid for, as the person who is supposed to stand next to me tomorrow. Don't. Margot looked back down at her plate, and then very quietly, she said it anyway. "She practiced it on me in the car on the way here," Margot said. "She said the nickname bit would kill." The table went cold. Not quiet, cold. There is a difference, and it's an important one. Quiet is when something is missing from a room. Cold is when something is present in it. Cold is 30 people arriving at the same conclusion at the same moment, and every single one of them deciding they do not want to be the first to say it out loud. Delaney's face came apart in stages, the way things actually break under load, not all at once, but in sequence. The smile went first, then the set of her shoulders. Then something behind her eyes flipped over from performance into pure animal panic, and for 1 second she looked exactly like the girl I grew up with, before the armor, before she learned that a laugh could be a weapon. Cole stood up, not dramatically. He didn't shove his chair or knock anything over. He just rose the way you do when your body has already made a decision your mouth hasn't caught up with yet. He wasn't doing it for the room. He didn't look around to see who was watching. "Granddad," he said, and his voice had stopped being steady. "Say the name again, the fire name. Say it again." Roy didn't take his eyes off me. "Ask them yourself," he said. So Cole turned to me and he asked, "What did they call you that for?" He said, not unkindly. He asked it the way you ask a question you have already half answered in your own head and are praying with everything in you to be wrong about. The whole room was watching me now, not my sister, and I understood that some line had been crossed that we were not going to be able to walk back. I kept my voice level. "The line teaches you that that too. Anchor point, I said. It's the spot you build a fire line off of, the piece of ground you will not let the fire get behind, no matter what. The crew works out from it, and if it goes bad, that's the ground that gives them a way out. I felt Roy's eyes on me like a hand pressing down on my shoulder. My super gave it to me because when a fire blows up and every instinct anybody has is to run, somebody has to be the thing the crew ties into. Somebody has to hold the corner so the rest of them have a door. Hole had gone the color of paper. Which fire? He said, and the words came out cracked. The one you earned it on. Which fire was it? And I told him. The Sweetwater fire, I said. 3 years ago this August, Northridge. Nobody at that table moved. Roy lowered himself back down into his chair very slowly, like the air in the room had turned to water, and he put one hand flat over his mouth, and over the top of that hand his eyes had gone wet and bright and very old. Cole made a sound that was not a word. He sat back down, hard, missing the front of his chair and catching it. He was looking at me like he had never once seen me before in his life, which, in the only way that counted, he hadn't. The Sweetwater fire? Roy said, and his voice finally broke, just on the second word, just once, and then he steadied it through sheer discipline. My grandson was a seasonal that summer. First year on a hand crew. 20 years old, didn't know a thing, thought he was bulletproof the way they all do. He had to stop and breathe. The entire room held still for him, gave him the time. Their crew got cut off on the North Ridge when the wind came around in the afternoon. 19 of them on the wrong side of a fire that had started making its own weather, throwing spot fires a quarter mile ahead of itself. The radio traffic, I've heard the radio traffic, son. His mother and I have listened to it more times than is good for us. Dispatch had already started talking about those 19 kids in the past tense. He looked at me, and the tears just came now, and he did not bother to wipe at them, did not look away from me for 1 second. And somebody held the anchor when every rule on the books and every nerve in their body said run. Somebody cut a line down into the black, into the ground that had already burned, and they stood in the gap, and they counted 19 kids down out of that fire one at a time before they walked out behind the last one. His hand was shaking against the tablecloth. Cole came home to us. We threw the biggest party Cedar County had ever seen, and in 3 years we have never, not once, been able to learn the name of the person who gave him back. The crew that came out of Sweetwater never knew it either. Different outfit, smoke so thick they never got a clear look at a face. The only thing any of them ever knew you by, and here his voice dropped to almost nothing, the only thing 19 families have prayed over for 3 years is the name those kids were shouting up that ridge in the dark. He pressed his lips together hard. They just called you Anchor. Cole was crying now, openly, the way grown men cry maybe twice in a whole life. He stood again, and this time he came all the way around the table, past his stunned parents, past the cousins, and he stopped right in front of me, and he could not get a single word out. He just lifted his hand and pressed it flat over his own heart and held it there, looking at me because there was nothing left to say, and saying anything at all would have made it smaller. And my sister sat at the head of her own rehearsal dinner, in her white dress, with her wine glass still in her hand because she did not know what else on earth to do with it, in front of every single person whose love and respect she had spent 8 months of her life trying to earn, and at last she understood exactly what she had done. She had stood up on purpose, with a line she'd rehearsed in the car, and made a punchline out of the one stranger at that table who had reached into a fire and handed her husband back to the world. And when I finally looked up from Cole's face and around that silent, frozen room, there was not one person left at the table who was looking at the bride. Every last one of them was looking at me.